Look, I don't care about your schedule. You are not using those things in my forest.
Listen, I ain't got time to argue. No.
One reason why, the same attitude that you three guys are giving me right here in this room today, and that is nobody cares.
Now, boys, let's play cards.
Imagine a massive spaceship drifts through the endless void, carrying something precious, the last forests of Earth, preserved under enormous glass domes. This isn't just another sci-fi setup. This is Silent Running. And in 1972, it showed us a future that feels more real with each passing year. You know how sometimes a movie comes along at exactly the wrong time? That's what happened with Silent Running. While Star Wars was still 5 years away, audiences were still buzzing about 2001, A Space Odyssey. Universal Pictures thought they had the next big thing on their hands. They brought in Douglas Trumbull, the genius behind 2001's groundbreaking effects, to direct his first feature. They gave him $1.3 million. Not huge money even then, but enough to work with. What they got was something completely different from what anyone expected. Instead of another mind-bending space epic, Trumbull gave us something more intimate. The early 70s were when environmental awareness was just starting to hit mainstream America. The first Earth Day had happened in 1970. People were starting to worry about pollution, about losing our natural world. Silent Running took those fears and launched them into space. But here's what makes this film so special, and why we need to talk about it today. While other sci-fi movies of the time were obsessing over alien invasions or dystopian futures, Silent Running was asking questions we're still struggling with. What's our responsibility to nature? At what point does preservation become obsession? And can machines be more human than actual humans? The movie didn't exactly set the box office on fire. Critics were divided. Some called it preachy, others praised its ambition. But over the years, something interesting happened. As our environmental crisis got worse, as automation became more real, Silent Running started to look less like science fiction and more like prophecy. The story I want to tell you today isn't just about a movie that was ahead of its time. It's about how sometimes the films that miss their moment end up speaking to us more clearly decades later. And trust me, when you see how they pulled off some of these effects with 1972 technology, your mind is going to be blown. There's this scene that always gives me chills. Freeman Lowell is teaching one of his robot buddies to plant a tree. The robot's movements are so precise, so careful. You forget you're watching a machine. And here's the crazy part. This wasn't CGI. This wasn't some fancy computer animation. This was 1972, and they pulled it off with nothing but practical effects and pure ingenuity. Let me walk you through how they made movie magic happen. Remember that massive spaceship I mentioned? That was actually a decommissioned aircraft carrier, the USS Valley Forge. Trumbull and his team took over this massive vessel and transformed it into their spaceship. They built those gorgeous geodesic domes right on the deck. Every time you see the ship floating through space, you're looking at incredibly detailed miniature work combined with footage shot on that actual carrier. But the real stars of the show are the drones, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Today, we just CGI those little guys in. Back then, they put 4 professional amputee actors in custom-made suits. The suits were basically white boxes with mechanical arms, and the actors had to learn to move in perfect sync to make the robots feel real. Think about that. No digital effects, no motion capture, just pure physical performance. And those forest scenes? They weren't just sets. Trumbull insisted on using real plants, thousands of them, under actual geodesic domes. When you see Lowell walking through his forest, that's all real greenery. They used a technique called front projection to make the space backgrounds work, something Trumbull had perfected on 2001. It's why everything still looks so convincing today, because most of what you're seeing is actually there. One of my favorite technical achievements is how they handled the lighting. In space, you've got this harsh contrast between total darkness and blinding sunlight. Instead of faking it with standard movie lights, They used an innovative system of mirrors and high-intensity lamps to create that authentic space feel. Next time you watch the film, pay attention to how the light hits the Valley Forge. It looks real because they figured out how real space lighting would actually work. Picture this. A massive spaceship drifts through the endless void, carrying something precious. The last forests of Earth, preserved under enormous glass domes. This isn't just another sci-fi setup, this is silent running. And in 1972, it showed us a future that feels more real with each passing year. You know how sometimes a movie comes along at exactly the wrong time? That's what happened with Silent Running. While Star Wars was still 5 years away, audiences were buzzing about 2001: A Space Odyssey. Universal Pictures thought they had the next big thing on their hands. They brought in Douglas Trumbull, the genius behind 2001's groundbreaking effects, to direct his first feature. They gave him $1.3 million. Not huge money even then, but enough to work with. What they got was something completely different from what anyone expected. Instead of another mind-bending space epic, Trumbull gave us something more intimate. The early 70s were when environmental awareness was just starting to hit mainstream America. The first Earth Day had happened in 1970. People were starting to worry about pollution, about losing our natural world. You know what's wild about Silent Running? It's basically a one-man show with 3 robots. Bruce Dern carries almost this entire movie on his shoulders as Freeman Lowell, and he knocks it out of the park. There's this scene where he's eating alone, talking to his plants, and you can just feel the loneliness pouring off the screen. But you also see this spark of obsession in his eyes. He's not just maintaining these forests, he's protecting the last piece of the world he loves. But let's talk about the real scene stealers. Huey, Dewey, and Louie. These robots shouldn't work. They're literally boxes with legs. But somehow, they become some of the most lovable characters in sci-fi history. There's this heartbreaking moment after Lowell has to perform surgery on Dewey. Yeah, robot surgery, how cool is that? And the way the other drone just stands there, waiting for its friend. I mean, who thought we'd get emotional over walking boxes? The people inside those robot suits deserve way more credit than they got. Mark Persons, Steve Brown, Cheryl Sparks, and Larry Weisenhunt. 4 bilateral amputees who brought these drones to life. The way they moved, the little head tilts, the hesitations. It's all so perfectly mechanical, yet somehow human. They had to learn to walk in perfect sync while sealed inside these hot, cramped suits. And remember, every take had to be perfect because you couldn't edit around the robots like you can with CGI today. There's this incredible sequence where Lowell is teaching the drones to plant trees. It's such a simple scene on paper. Guy shows robot how to garden. But there's so much going on. You've got this hardened ecologist sharing his passion with machines. The drones learning, mimicking, becoming more than just service bots. It's like watching a weird little family come together, and we need to talk about that ending. No spoilers, but there's a moment where Lowell has to make an impossible choice. The way Dern plays it, you can see every emotion crossing his face. Joy, sadness, acceptance, all at once. And the final shots of the forest dome drifting through space, with Joan Baez's haunting voice in the background. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Fun fact, Dern actually spent time with real botanists to prepare for the role. He wanted to know exactly how someone would care for plants in space. That's the kind of detail that makes his performance feel so authentic. When he's checking soil samples or adjusting the lighting, those are real techniques he learned. The most amazing part? Most of these scenes were shot in sequence, which almost never happens in movies. But because they were working on an actual aircraft carrier and had limited time with the sets, they had to film everything in order. That's probably why the emotional progression feels so natural. We're watching these relationships develop in real time. You want to know how committed Bruce Dern was to this role? He actually lived on the Valley Forge during filming. Said he wanted to know what it felt like to be isolated like Lowell. Talk about method acting, but that's what makes Silent Running special. Everyone involved treated it like more than just another sci-fi movie. They were telling a story they believed in. Let's rewind back to 1972. Star Wars hasn't revolutionized sci-fi yet. Everyone's still talking about 2001: A Space Odyssey. And here comes Silent Running, this weird little movie about a space botanist and his robot friends. Critics didn't quite know what to make of it. Variety called it message-heavy. The New York Times praised the effects, but said it was trying too hard to be meaningful. And audiences? They were probably expecting space battles and alien invasions. Instead, they got a guy talking to plants. But here's where it gets interesting. While Silent Running didn't exactly kill it at the box office, something fascinating started happening over the years. People kept discovering it, kept talking about it. Film students would watch it and go, wait, how did they do those effects? Environmentalists would see it and think, this is exactly what we've been trying to say. There were all these little details people started noticing on repeat viewings. Like how Joan Baez's songs aren't just background music. They're practically Greek chorus, commenting on everything that's happening. Or how the Valley Forge isn't just named randomly. It's about enduring through a harsh winter, holding out hope for spring. That's some clever stuff right there. You want to hear something wild? They actually shot multiple endings for the film. The one we got is pretty heavy, but there was an even darker version. And get this, there was also a more optimistic one where, well, I won't spoil it, but let's just say Lowell's fate was very different. The studio pushed for the happier ending, but Trumbull stuck to his guns. He knew this wasn't supposed to be a feel-good story. The film had some seriously ahead-of-its-time elements that nobody really picked up on back then. Those drones? They're basically early versions of today's AI assistants. Learning, adapting, developing personalities. The whole concept of preserving Earth's ecology in space? SpaceX is literally working on growing plants for Mars missions right now. And that corporate callousness toward nature? Well, just check today's headlines. A lot of people don't know this, but NASA actually helped out with the film. They provided real space footage and technical advice. That's why the space scenes look so authentic. They're based on actual space photography. And those geodesic domes weren't just sci-fi fantasy, they were based on real designs for space habitats. Some of those designs are still being considered for lunar bases today. What's really fascinating is how different audiences interpret the film now compared to 1972. Back then, people thought the environmental message was overblown. Today, viewers are like, oh, this is basically a documentary from the future. When the film first came out, the idea of corporations having more power than governments seemed far-fetched. Now, not so much. The movie even predicted our complicated relationship with automation. Those robots, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, they're more sympathetic than the human crew. They care more, try harder, show more loyalty. Sound familiar? Just think about how many people feel closer to their digital assistants than their neighbors these days. You know what's kind of amazing? A movie from 1972 about saving plants in space feels more relevant now than when it was released. When you look at films influenced by Silent Running, it's like following a trail of breadcrumbs through modern sci-fi. Ever notice how Wall-E seems like a distant cousin of Huey and Dewey? Those lonely robots tending to the last remnants of Earth. That's pure Silent Running DNA right there. Then there's Moon, another story about isolation in space with a focus on the psychological toll. And let's talk about Interstellar. Those massive space stations preserving human civilization? They're basically upgraded versions of Silent Running's forest domes. Even the recent High Life borrowed some of its DNA, the whole last garden in space concept. But it's not just movies. Look at what's happening in the real world. We've got billionaires racing to build space colonies while the Amazon burns. Scientists are literally creating sealed biospheres to study how we might grow food on Mars. And here's Silent Running, quietly saying, yeah, we thought about this stuff 50 years ago. The film's themes hit differently now. When Freeman Lowell talks about never seeing forests on Earth anymore, it doesn't sound like science fiction. It sounds like the evening news. We're watching glaciers melt and species disappear in real time. Those scenes of corporate executives dismissing environmental concerns, that could be footage from any modern boardroom meeting. And let's talk about those drones. In 1972, the idea of robots developing personalities was pure fantasy. Today, we're having serious discussions about FAI rights and robot ethics. People are forming emotional attachments to their digital assistants. Suddenly, those scenes of Lowell playing cards with his robot buddies don't seem so far-fetched. So what can we learn from silent running today? Maybe it's that the best science fiction isn't about predicting the future. It's about warning us, showing us where we might be headed if we don't change course. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just reminding us that nature isn't something we own. It's something we're supposed to protect. What do you think? Which modern environmental sci-fi films carry on silent running's legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into classic sci-fi, hit that subscribe button for more analysis of films that were ahead of their time.